Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of Duel and Discussions, where I bring on someone to talk about random subjects and we take a deep dive into it. This week, we have Tom Bombadil, a Frenchman. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm called Tom Bombadil on the internet. I was maybe I'm known as Blur around certain circles. I'm from I'm French Canadian. I'm from Quebec, and I have a bit of interest in all the social commentary and all the political stuff other streamers usually talk about. I've been following a few streamers for the past 2 years, maybe. I've seen what the online community kind of looks like. It's good side as well as its bad side, let's say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really down for anything today.
All right. Well, do you have a particular? I know you had a particular topic that you want to talk about today. So, do you mind sharing that to the crowd?
Well, we'll probably get there, but yeah, basically, we can get into it right away. But um, I wanted to talk about like the impact and the utility of political speech, or well, the social commentary aspect of media in general, like the alternative media included, and against that, the credulity and the susceptibility of the audiences and the public in general. Um, my position is I actually think, um, well, it's interesting because I've looked at a bunch of stats a few weeks ago about that, especially here in Quebec, about the participation rate in politics when it comes to voting and all that stuff. And it seems like there's a direct correlation with like the development of communication technologies like the internet, the different platforms, all that stuff. But at the same time, I'm kind of skeptical as to what degree are people actually influenced by all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of temperament involved in all that stuff. Like, you can be informed, you can have some values and some philosophical notions to kind of orient yourself, ethically speaking, in the world. But I'm I don't know to what extent do people actually, are they pliable, and to what degree are they pliable? Are they susceptible to, like, when they listen to commentary and social media influencers and all that stuff? To what degree does it actually have an impact on them, or do they actually? I've heard the term bias confirmation quite a lot, and I'm wondering, do people only seek confirmation bias, or do they actually get influenced? Do they change their mind
Oh,
basically?
yeah. Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. So I would say like for people that are like hard locked into like political parties, for example, like I know that Canada has a few, but here like we have like two major ones. So if you're locked into those parties, like I think yesterday's presidential debate was probably a very good example of this. Like if you're a Democrat, you probably walked away being like Biden was strong in these points, and if you're a Republican, you're walking away with Trump was strong throughout the whole thing. But I think ultimately, like I think the the thing that I really enjoy about political debates of that nature, like the presidential and like whenever governors are talking about their policies and stuff, it's because I think that has always been meant to reach the independent voter, not the people that have already basically made up their mind about where they're going to go with their vote, right? Because I don't think a lot of people vote informed, unfortunately. I think a lot of people have an idea of what they want to do and then they're just kind of like play with it, right? Like they just kind of like play their role in their party.
Do you think do you think the independent voters are are they politically undecisive, or are they straight up like apolitical and they don't care about it?
I think it's a mixture. For I think the majority of them are probably don't really care about politics in their day to day lives. They only like
Mm.
interact with it in like again, like presidential elections, like something that's like really in the forefront. But for like small like government stuff, like at the local level or even at the state level, I don't think a lot of people care.
Mm.
And
Well,
I think that's kind of like why political commentary can seems like it doesn't go anywhere, right? Because it's not it does like reach a level of bias to each individual person, right? Like if you're watching Destiny, you're probably you're more on the Democrat side, so you're probably going to be agreeing with him a lot more than let's say you agree with someone like Andrew or Andrew Wilson, right? Like
yeah.
there's going to be a mixture of things that are going to play into it. I don't think that independent voters seek out these types of like political commentators. I would say in more traditional media, like in
It
like
depends.
well,
Because in political debates, you yeah, there is the political movement and affiliation related to it, but there is
mm,
also a bunch of ethical and philosophical dilemmas that even people who are apolitical per se, they probably are interested in such questions of ethics and shit. So I mean, maybe they would still watch it as entertainment. And I would agree with you that probably people. I'm pretty sure people who are in the middle range who can be swayed in a way or another, um, are not totally apolitical. Because from what I've seen, like I told you, like the stats about like political participation amongst the population, like 40 years ago here in Quebec, it was at about I think 30%, which I mean 30% is not a lot of people actually participating in society, quote
yeah,
unquote, or at least in the political sphere of society. But nowadays, after all the communication, like the media and all the Facebook, YouTube, and all the internet platforms, it's now at 85%. So even though people may be unaffiliated, politically speaking, at least the impact I see, or I kind of interpret from the stats, is that maybe they're not swayed on one party or another, but at least it depends if you think it's a positive thing or not. But at least what it does, it gets people involved and it gets people like aware and informed enough, enthralled into the process to where we got from a 35% participation rate to 85%. So I would agree with you that people are not apolitical. They're probably just, like we say, middle ground, unaffiliated, independent voters, and all that stuff.
yeah, yeah. I would also say that I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I think that politics has gotten a lot more showmanship in it than it used to, right? Like if we look at politics in like the 90s compared to now, it is like a completely different ball game. People are way more animated about certain topics. It has been it's been kind of a weird transition to watch. Um,
Mm,
from like a I think that's why people are getting motivated into these like into engaging with politics in general. But I would agree with you that the silent majority that existed for a long time is slowly getting like taken away, right? Like more people are participating, maybe not for the right reasons, but they're still participating, which is
mm,
could be a positive thing as long as I think it is the duty of the people that are like um advocating for their political party or some sort of political reform to approach that with like a high level of care, right? Um
mm,
like if I were to use an example, it'd probably be like Progressive Victory, right? Progressive Victory pays its people to push its narrative forward, which I don't think is ethically correct. I would say that
mm,
that kind of corrupts the whole like the whole meaning of everything they're trying to like uphold, right? So it I don't know how people would engage with this in a way where it could be uh ethically correct. I would say, because like you do have to pay your spokespeople. I get that to a certain degree, but I also think that it kind of should operate on a volunteer basis, right? Like if you believe in something, I believe that you should spend part of your time doing that, right? Like the people that go canvassing are if you're doing it for money, then what are you really doing at that point?
Well, you can do both. You can be of a specific political affiliation or persuasion and still want to make a living out of it. If you're good at something, I mean, why not get paid for it? Um, but yeah, but and to what extent are people actually swayed by the political commentaries they listen to? Like again, the term confirmation bias comes up a lot nowadays, and I would take a psychological approach to that issue. I would actually think that people only seek confirmation bias, or if they tilt or they are swayed in any way, it's probably something that it's not in one election cycle that you will see that change. Like individually speaking, maybe in mass you can see that change, but individually speaking, I'm assuming that people slowly progress throughout their lives. And I would think that it has more to do. I would take a psychological approach. I would think that it has more to do with their temperament, their life experiences, their educational background, their familial background, the values of their like the spiritual values, or the for atheist people or agnostic people. Well, I mean, we can still use the term spiritual, right? Even though
Yeah.
it's without a god or a metaphysics behind it. But yeah, I would say confirmation bias is probably like the underpinning of it. I'm pretty sure like so at that point, is it actually useful for people to make social commentary, and is it merely entertainment? Are we just playing to a base we know we can attract and make money out of, or an audience we can gather to have the viewership and all that stuff? Or do streamers and content creators and political or social commentary in media people, do they actually believe that they're changing anything? Like that's something I actually asked once to a particular streamer. I won't say the name. No particular reason. I just think it's. I don't want to bring it up for. I'm. There's something wrong with that. I feel like, but anyway, and I asked them like, do you actually think you're changing anything? And it's actually a good question. I had an answer from that particular person, but what do you think the answer is there? Do content creators actually believe in the social change they claim to to manifest in the world from their speech and creating their audiences and communities and all that stuff?
I would say that. So I've watched a lot of content creators on multiple different sides of the aisle, right? And I would say that most of them do believe the thing that they're saying. A lot of them are realistic as well, where they're saying like there's not a lot of reach that I can achieve here because they're a small content creator, or just even if you're a large content creator, like you're still not going to have the level of reach to let's say a CNN would have, or like a Fox News would have, right? That where they're
Hmm.
broadcasting to millions of people a day, or I just don't.
So it's entertainment based on ideology, basically.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
I also think that there is like I think a lot of people like to engage in a a battle of ideals as well. I think that's where a lot of political commentators really go to, where they have an ideal and they try to test that out as much as possible. Obviously,
And
they're
what's what's the point of that practice?
um
To argue online and to
mm,
be contemptuous with other people and
yeah, to argue online for sure, but it's also I for like someone like me that likes to argue politics online. It's about sharpening those arguments with in like if I am talking to an independent voter or someone that like my arguments are at their highest level where can be a bit persuasive here, where I can probably lean you one way or be like, this argument is trash, I'm gonna throw this out because it's not gonna help me in any of these like circumstances that I want to use, right? So I think there is utility behind it, not just being argumentative, but I think there is a lot of utility in debating these kinds of ideals.
Or the potential to sway people with
Yeah,
better articulations and
yeah,
better formulations.
yeah.
Yeah, so okay, so it's not in the I guess it's a long-term goal, like in the immediate when the streamer is arguing on a particular stream on a particular day. It's not about changing the audience's mind now after this particular stream. It's more so uh individually for the for the debater to develop their skills whenever they're confronted with people who have questions and are inquiring into their particular ideologies and all that stuff. Is that what you're saying, basically?
Yeah, yeah. Which is I think the major goal for a lot of political streamers. I think that's what they're trying to do. Like I brought up a few examples already, but like I think those people really try to reach to a certain audience, or at least cross into the other side of the aisle and try to pull people into their like ideals.
And to what degree do you think that I'm kind of a I don't know if I would say I'm an anarchist. I'm more so a hermit. But I'm not. Do you actually think that? Do you think mass and big scale movements and political movements actually have that much influence in the world and the way we live and the path forward?
Um,
Or
I would say that a lot of big movements do have a lot of power behind them. I think people have jumped the gun on a lot of movements nowadays, so kind of like minimizes the effect, right? So like if you try to make everything into a movement, then obviously it's not going to have the same impact as like the Million Man March in Washington D.C., right? Like that was a movement and it achieved very great things. So I do think like there is political movements that are worth expanding your energy on.
what did it achieve specifically?
It started. We started seeing a lot more civil rights reforms and a bunch of things to that they were advocating for. So it didn't achieve like 100. I don't think anything will ever achieve like 100% of the results you want, right? But it does fix certain
When you
aspects of like what you are trying to fix, and I think that's kind of the process that we have to work with.
when you say reforms, you're talking about laws and regulations, basically, right?
Yeah, laws and regulations.
And to what extent are they actually enforced and followed through?
To a varying level, obviously, throughout the years, right? Like we've seen multiple instances of this being. We can still say that there are places where it probably is more inconvenient to be African American than it is to be a white person, right? But I think that in most cases, I think it did achieve what it was trying to achieve. Um, Now like I can take a more current like movement, right, like the Me Too movement that I think started off as a good idea, but it was used very
Yeah.
maliciously in by several people that wanted to use that platform in a way to garnish clout or garnish some sort of like infamy or fame or whatever it was. But I think there was a lot of I think that has a lot of the pitfalls that you can fall into when you have these kinds of movements.
Yeah, opportunists always take that. Yeah, they take the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not even just about opportunists in that instance. It's about if you create a movement, you have to create it from a logical standpoint, right? When you create it for like a just like a baseline fact, like a believe all women, right? Like that just kind of seems like a recipe for disaster, right? Like it's gonna have shortcomings no matter how you're approaching it. Even if the opportunist
From
people
the
didn't exist there, right? Like there will probably be a liar amongst them.
mhm. From the perspective, I've never been like politically involved, boots on the ground, participating in movements and all that jazz. The impression I have is that the only way I see it translating usually is into a bunch of sensitivity campaigns. Like I never see like concrete and practical applications of these specific regulations, norms, and laws that they're trying to push and all that stuff. Um, like when they even Quebec is very known for defending the French language and being really hard on it. They passed a law recently again, amending the laws regarding protecting French in Quebec. And the only thing I can see as a result of it is more sensitivity campaign and propaganda on the news and on the radio, on television, all that stuff, on the internet. Even when you're from a specific region, you get ads that are targeted, right? So here in Quebec, I get ads that are targeted to me as a French Canadian, and so I see these sensitivity like ads, and I'm wondering, is that all it actually does? Is to give it a platform for propaganda. And when I say propaganda, there's a bad connotation to propaganda, but you have to take the root of the word. It's to
Yeah, no,
propagate an
to
idea,
propagate. Yeah,
and propagating a good idea is not necessarily bad. But in the, so yeah, basically all I see these movements uh, kind of evolving into is a bunch of campaign. Is they just talk about it so that the governments approve talking about it further. And I'm like, at that point, is there anything practical being uh, yeah, is there anything practical to it aside from the discussion, the public discussion it
well, would you
entails?
say that like let's say for that example, using Quebec as the example, um would you say like anti-discrimination laws would be a way to logically like follow that?
Um, Anti-discrimination laws. I
Yeah,
mean,
like let's
it
say like
depends.
like if like a company's hiring you and you speak French, they are not allowed to discriminate against you. This isn't like a real thing. I'm just stating something as like a way it can present itself in a more concrete way instead of just being like yeah sensitive, because I do agree like there are a lot of it does push a lot of sensitivity into the world. That's what a lot of these cultural movements present as. So I wouldn't disagree with you there. I would just say that there are ways that I would see that it could show itself in more concrete ways is what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I mean, in that instance, when it comes to discrimination for hiring processes and practices, maybe I could see it as a benefit, and I can see how it is practically applied. Um, but I'm not even sure I agree. I actually agree with that sort of application of the law. Um, I mean, a company for a company. I mean, I need to see like I think I value self-interest more than I value forcing people to like forcing businesses to entertain certain practices. I think is kind of it's kind of useless. Like a business that would have such practices as they would discriminate against some people would see their pool of candidate for potential skills and talents reduced such a way that they wouldn't be competitive in the global market nowadays.
Yeah.
So I don't even think we need a law for that type of thing. But maybe in the US, it's more so the case.
Um, I,
And
I,
nowadays, I would kind
I
of
wouldn't
doubt it.
agree. Even in the U.S., that's more the case. I would agree with you there that they kind of like. I'm more of that thinking where it's like you're kind of cutting off a certain part of the market for yourself, where you could be capitalizing there. But
Mm-hmm.
so I would agree with you there.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the point of business. Like if they fail because they are stuck in some ideal or whatever, then it's kind of on them, right? Like it shouldn't be forced upon
Yeah.
them. But in a way, it's already forced, right? Because they did cut off that part of the market. That market is no longer, so it kind of is forcing, but in a different way.
In a non, it's not that invasive. I'll give you
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay, my camera just fucked up. So if you want to take out my my camera, it's all good. I tried to set up, didn't work. But okay, so I guess law in terms of business practices, we can think about ecological impacts and all that stuff as well. I can see the benefits there. I can see why it's a good thing. Um, I mean, when it comes to medicine as well, um, yeah, I think I would just grant you that there's actually an impact there.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say that's kind of like the core of some of these movements, right? Like they do try to
mhm,
that's kind of what they're trying to appeal to.
yeah,
So like I would say like there are practical ways of doing it. I would say yes, like there are super invasive ways where you're forcing like larger businesses to do whatever the whatever political movement that they're kowtowing to at the moment is. I would say that's dangerous in any regard, right? Because it could go real far no matter how like you take it.
mm, mm. Still, it has an impact. But would you say that like rare instances of technological developments, new discoveries when it comes to different scientific disciplines, and like human creativity and ingenuity in general is actually more of a vector for change than social pressuring of governments and all that stuff.
Yeah, I would say that's more I would say that's a way better way of approaching it, right? The issue at hand would be that there are certain things that I would say would probably need some sort of like some sort of push forward. Like
Well,
we
if there's a, I mean, if there's a demand, there will be a push forward.
yeah, but like in some cases like we can see like people like corner a specific market, right? So I would say that
Mm.
in instances like that, I would probably be more on board. But again, it you cornered the market, so like there are laws against that as well. So I don't know. I don't know how much a government should impose its will on private businesses. Is there a level that you would
Yeah, I'm
feel
not.
comfortable with?
Well, I'm not even sure that according to, like if we were to follow the law of offer and demand, I wouldn't even be so sure that there would be a demand for competitivity on the in a specific market actually. So if you have a company that can fulfill the needs of all the customers, the potential customers of the market, I mean, will these customers actually will they ask or encourage newcomers into the field? I'm not so sure about it because we can see uh the Coca-Cola, Walmart, and all the big corporates nowadays They have competitors, but to a certain extent, they have some sort of monopoly in a way. When you think Coca-Cola, you don't think the drink Coca-Cola, right? You think a bunch of fucking drinks, like you think a
Yeah.
bunch of different products, whole range of products. When you yeah, and it's the case for every type of product, cosmetic products. Uh,
Well, yeah, conglomerates are like the big
but
thing, right? Like,
but but how do you solve the issue of monopoly in a like pure free market system? Can we actually rely on the demand? Can we rely on the customers to demand competitivity on the market? I'm not sure about it. Pretty sure we cannot actually.
yeah, I would agree with you. Actually, I would agree with that statement. I would say like it's very hard to regulate for that, right?
Hmm.
So
So in the same vein, when it comes to politics and it comes to social movements, um, I guess okay. Let's say there are practical applications stemming from these movements, concrete things being done and followed through. Um, but even if there was not, now that I think about it, I'm thinking even like making your population sensitive or aware of the different opportunities, even those who are only theoretical and potential, is a good thing because in a way you create that demand for competitivity and for different solutions to an issue. So even if the entailment of social movement is only sensitivity campaigns, I would say that when I think about it right now, I would think that's actually a good thing already.
so you would move towards the sensitivity campaigns instead of
Yeah, yeah. Thinking about it just now, I'm seeing that social movements, political movements probably have a beneficial effect. Like, and when I say creating demand, it's not exactly creating demand. It's installing the idea in the population. So even people who are ingenious and entrepreneurial, they'll live in a world where these ideas kind of float around, and if they're into engineering or if they're very creative, maybe they can come up with something, a new product of some kind, a new idea, concept, system, a new a new product basically. So
yeah.
it's not only creating a demand, it's actually influencing the offer sector as well. So there, I guess there's a dialectic between the two, between mass movement and scale movements and more individual, I would say, application ingenuity and the human potential, basically. I'm
But
someone
how,
who
how would
rarely
you
thinks it's
how
like
would you approach, like if you had to start a movement of your own, how would you approach that?
um, I know it's kind of a cliche, but leading by example. I think it's and leading by example in a way. If we think of an individual that incarnates his ideal or her ideals, they become a kind of a source for the propaganda of their specific idea or temperament or ingenuity and potential. So and in a way, then it kind of snowballs from person to person. People take up on it, pick up on it. Um, so in a way, even individual like you have mass propaganda and you have individuals propagating their ideas as well. So I'm not even sure I would, if I were to start a movement, would I actually even start a movement is kind of the issue here. Or would I just do what I think is right navigate throughout the world with that in mind, trying uh, to the best of my abilities, always try to incarnate that ideal. And yeah, I'm not even sure I would need a movement. Actually, I wouldn't coerce people, and I wouldn't try to um, get people on my side, quote unquote. And I wouldn't try to gather participation in what I actually want to do. I would just do the things I want to do. And when asked about it, when having conversations with people in life in general, wherever I go, uh, just trying to always have these ideals in mind, I think is the proper thing to do. Um, one of the reasons why I kind of have something against social movements and all that stuff is usually people who start these movements. I perceive some form of piety, which is really something. I guess it comes from my grandparents. Like they told me that back in the days, yes, people used to be a little bit more religious, but the thing was that even though they were religious, and even though nowadays people are less and less religious, people were less pious at the time. And nowadays, with the internet and all these platforms, it's like it's a it's a constant lambasting of fucking piety everywhere we look around, everywhere we gaze at. There's someone talking about their ideals, what they want us to do, what they think is best for the world, and all that stuff. So I'm not against the ideas and the propagation itself. It's more so the profile type of someone who would engage in such actions that I have something against.
Okay.
Like with all the stuff that came out of Black Lives Matter, right? The mentions and all the shit they bought themselves.
Yeah.
That's a perfect display of a movement that may claim, and they show, and they advertise themselves as having a particular goal in mind, but really there are individuals behind the movement. They have their own interests. And usually if it's not money or self-gratification, well, it's self-gratification, be it material gratification or a form of self-esteem related, trying to be pious, trying to moral grandstand and all that stuff. So yeah,
But
that's kind of what motivated me today to talk about this issue, because from especially with the fact that nowadays anyone can start a channel and have their own little corner of the world with a bunch of fanatics following them, being very zealous about everything that guy particular streamer says and does. Like there's I don't see a lot of streamers actually displaying passion, conviction. What I usually see is a bunch of people trying to make it from their own persona and to advertise their own persona and put themselves forward as like love me, love me, love me. And I think that's kind of, to me, it's the cringiest thing ever. I don't know. I have a particular disdain for it. Like the channels I like most would be channels where you have, even when it comes like to gaming streamers, at least like when you see someone who you're thinking, yeah, that guy probably even before he started streaming, he probably wasted like 7 hours a day gaming, so might as well just stream it, right?
yeah.
But I like seeing people who, like, I'm really into gardening, so I like a lot of people who they show their gardens, they inform you, so it's not about them, it's about the information and the beauty. They can kind of show you the achievements that they manage to things they manage to achieve. And or people who, I don't know, they're really into fitness, and you can see from their body that they fucking worked at it and they
Enjoy their
achieved that
yeah.
state of corporal form. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so being public, because of piety and moral grandstanding versus really having, when it comes to politics and social commentaries, I like to see convictions. And say what you want about like the Crucible and Andrew Wilson. I think Andrew Wilson, I know people have doubts about is he a grifter, is he not? It's like, you know what? It's impossible to know what color underwear he's wearing, all right? So it's speculation. But at least from my sense of the guy is that he, I don't know if it's conviction, but I feel like it's the type of guy that if you were to meet him at a bar or in other social circumstances, he would probably talk about all that shit, like social issues, trans issues, religious issues, ethical issues. When it comes to like he's very into philosophy and all that stuff.
Yeah, like there's a
I'm
vested
thinking that's the
interest
type of
in what he's
guy.
talking about, right? Yeah, I would agree.
He has a passion for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you see Destiny as well, Destiny obviously has a passion. Maybe it's because he loves the sound of his own voice. That's a possibility. But at least you can see that these people, they do something that they really love to do,
Yeah.
and it's not about them. It's about the passion itself and the substance of it.
Would you say that if they're trying to achieve their goal, right, their political goal, would you say that that is more important in certain
I'm not so sure
cases?
they're trying. I'm not so sure they're trying to achieve political goals. I'm pretty sure it's about the exercise itself. I think they have a knack for it and they enjoy themselves exercising that capacity they have to argue and to articulate and to display that is actually something they like to do. And you can be when I talk there's a fine line between arrogance, being pious, and being proud of something. And when you
Yeah.
can articulate your way out of specific arguments and all that stuff during the course of a debate, I mean it's something to be achieved. It's something that you develop during the course. Like you have to practice it. It's a muscle. You have to train at that. So you can be
Yeah.
proud of it. But there's a fine line between that and trying to just moral grandstand and all that stuff.
Okay. But like, let's use Destiny as an example, right? Destiny has, for his political movement, has actually done stuff where I'm just like, this is something I don't see a lot of streamers do, or a lot of people that advocate for this stuff. Where he got a group of people to go canvassing, he paid out of pocket for hotel rooms for these people, and offered to pay staff there as well. So I don't see that very often with political streamers. So it was strange to see him do it.
Where it's one of the rare political streamers that actually have the funds to do it. I mean, at that point,
That
he's
that
big
is
enough.
that's also true. Like he is one of like he does have a shit ton of money, so a lot of people can't really do the thing. But I think like if you're advocating for certain things, like you should at least like go to a protest or something, right? Like I think there are definitely lines you can take.
Well, it depends if you believe in that. Protest is a tool, right? If you want
Yeah.
to advance your ideology, but do these guys actually believe in it? Because I've heard like Andrew talk about the fact that they need a Orthodox Christian. Well, not specifically Orthodox. He said like they need a Christian grassroots political movement of some kind.
Yeah.
But does he like so maybe he believes in it? He says they need it, so I guess he might believe in it. It depends, what comes out of his mouth and what he actually believes in. But uh, I again, you can hold an ideology, but not necessarily like there are different tools and vectors of attack to propagate your ideas and your ideology. Manifesting, protesting, and all that stuff. It's okay. I might be getting into some conspiracy stuff here, but it's not really conspiratorial. I mean, I've read Klaus Schwab's book, and something that he says when it comes to governing countries and all that stuff in the 21st century is that governments have they need contingencies due to the fact that he thinks that in the future we will see more and more demonstrations, like movements, protests, manifestations, and all that stuff. And governments actually need to have contingencies because it will be something that is kind of a natural part of society and all that stuff. So to a certain extent, like basis, the basic function of a protest is kind of losing its the protesting is losing its function because to protest is to go against a government, a something that is enshrined in law already, and you're protesting a law, so you're ready to get arrested, going to jail and all that stuff, getting fines maybe in order to get to court, appeal, and try to push political movements to create amendments to these laws. But nowadays, it's like governments, they know there will be protests against, like if they want to pass a law, there'll be a protest against it. If there's actually already a law that they want to defend and they want to hold and maintain, they know there's going to be a protest, right? So they're very aware of the fact that protests is a big part of society now, and I'm not sure it has the same impact nowadays. So if you have a particular ideology, would you actually go for that tool that is a protest? I mean, you got to believe in the effectiveness of protesting, and I'm not sure nowadays a lot of people do.
Yeah. I feel like people do believe in the protests themselves. I just don't think that. I think we approach protesting a lot different. I think with the word, this is one of those diminished words that we've seen. You know what I mean? Where before I would say that there was protesting was about achieving a certain goal or achieving a certain action through political movements or whatever the case may be. But currently, I think
Yeah, but
that a lot of people have used that as not a like as a stepping stool, but as a crux to like I forget the word for it. Um
I feel
Social
like
disorder,
nowadays
I don't know.
protesting is actually I feel like it's more of a it's akin to a poll basically for people who have the means to navigate like the social circles of people who actually have power politically speaking and socially speaking. Like you want if these people who can actually create change and like enterprises that will entail changes. Like if they want to know if something will pass amongst I I will consider myself a pleb, so I'm not using it pejoratively, but if they want to know what the pleb thinks about something, they'll look at the manifestations and the protests. But it's again, it's more so to get the pulse of what the plebs think more so than to change anything.
Yeah.
Then if these quote unquote modern aristocrats want to do something about it, they can. But basically, it's just yeah, we see the plebs really want something. Are we giving it to them, or are we not giving it to them? Is it actually good for them, even though they want it, or they're against it, or is it bad for them? I mean, and they basically decide. People, not only people who have political powers, but when as I've said, people who are able to start enterprises as well, people who have money to actually gather resources, distribute them, transform resources, and create products and things that the plebs will actually use at some point. But there's a lag between what we think is socially effective and what people who have these means actually think is effective. I think it's more of a polling tool nowadays to protest. I think it doesn't have a real impact, yeah, except that, like the government can create sensitivity campaign for particular causes and stuff, and movements can do that as well. Plebs can. It's a way for them to to say to their leader or to their aristocratic class, okay, we the plebs want that, and then there's kind of a dialectic, and it engages in the there's a rapport there, there's a dynamic there. But I'm not sure protest in itself is actually it's not a means to an end. It's just a form of expression more so.
Oh, you wouldn't say it's a tool to be used to achieve what one wants for society and the changes that they want to see achieved. I would say
Well, it's a tool.
that would
It's
be
basically
the thing.
it basically just amplifies the opinions of the pleb. Basically,
Yeah.
it's a megaphone. That's all it is. It just allows you to scream louder. So do these three? Is it because Andrew Wilson and Destiny don't participate in protests that they don't like? Is it necessarily a display of your conviction to participate in protest? Not necessarily.
Not
Again, it depends if
necessarily.
you
Yeah.
believe in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I would I would say that there is a level of, it's one thing to talk about doing something right and like advocate for change and all these other things, but it's another to like actually go out and try to achieve that goal, right? Like I think a lot of like we were saying, I think a lot of political streamers are kind of like in the way of just saying things for the sake of saying it.
Or to win,
Yeah.
just to come across as authoritative
Yeah.
in the face of their audiences. Yeah, there's a lot of that, I feel like.
Which I think is like totally the wrong approach to a lot of this stuff, right? Like I would say that that's probably going to lead to a lot more negatives than it would goods, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like that's actually something I don't know if I learned it or I discovered it about different streamers and different communities, but online communities, which I mean, are they actually communities? That's another topic conversation we can get into. But and especially in religious quote unquote communities, uh, and as an agnostic, I'm kind of dumbfounded by it. But I feel like we there's a lot of people. I was about to say we live in the world that, but I don't know if it's generalized. But um, I feel like there's a lot of people who seek certainty, and when it comes to political or societal issues, people want a cut and dry answer to the issues. Um, and they want their side to be right, the other side to be wrong. They want the debate to be about a winner and a
A winner
loser.
and a
But in
loser,
the
yeah.
end, sorry, what?
I would say, yeah, a winner and a loser. I think that's like the common misconception about like debates, right? Like that a lot of people approach it that way, and I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a lot of people actually consider it that way. I would say that most commentators that I've seen that have engaged in debates aren't really. There are some for sure that try to go for like wins and dunks and all this other crap, but I think there a lot of them try to approach it from like, again, I just want to get the other side's ideals or try to understand my argument a bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, specifically when it comes to conversation that kind of delve into etymological issues. Like when you talk about ontology, when you talk about this state of things, and you're trying to describe the world, you want the highest degree of certainty. But even there, would say I would say certainty is impossible actually, and that's why I say religious people kind of they seem to tend to want that absolute certainty about things, and for that they rely on God. and the fact that the Bible said, and the Bible being the word of God, and then why is God real? But well, because the Bible is. So it's a self. It justifies its own like legitimacy and authority. But in a way, I think that when it comes to questions of like describing the world, there's a relationship between the observer, you as an individual, and the subject matter that you're trying to think about or debate about, even because debate is basically thinking, but two people bouncing back
Yeah,
their own thoughts.
bouncing back ideas.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, well, that's what it should be, but now
Well,
it's well, even a fight is bouncing back, but
yeah. It's not until we get to levels of
I would say,
like where people are using like ad hominems that I would say that kind of like all falls out of like the
yeah,
window, right?
yeah. But my point is, there's a relationship between the relative distance between the observer or the thinker and the substance they're thinking about or they're trying to address. There's there's a direct relation between the distance between the observer and the subject and the degree of certainty that you can think you hold. Like when we think about the origins of the universe and our perception of the human species place in the universe and what it entails morally, ethically speaking. Is there a creator? Is there not? I mean, when it comes to metaphysical claims and all that stuff, there's a high degree of uncertainty in my mind because it's the ultimate. It's the most distant thing you can think about. But when it comes to like when I put a foot in front of the other, I'll be walking. I have a higher degree of certainty. But even there, I would say that I have a 99% degree of certainty because we can be in a simulation, right? That can
Yeah, that could be
that can be the
possible.
case.
Yeah, that could be
So
possible.
yeah, so when people debate and they talk about morality, ethics, and epistemology actually, not etymology, epistemology. Um, I don't I feel like the fact that people make a living out of um, their they make a living out of coming across as having the highest degree of certainty, and therefore they will always make claims of I am authoritative, my arguments are infallible, I have the highest degree of certainty. You can 100% believe in what I say because see, he cannot argue against what I just said. So I win, therefore I'm right 100%. We can be 100% sure of what I just said. When in fact, as an individual, when you disconnect, you go outside, lay in the grass, have a little smoke or something, and you think about these things, you're like, hmm, I'm really just a little speck of dust. I'm just a fucking pleb. I don't really know for sure anything. So so there's a disconnect, I feel like, between people who make a living out of debating and talking about social issues, political issues, and the audience members. Well, you have a part of the audience they're kind of oblivious and they're blinded by the fact that they're very fans. They're very fanatical
Yeah.
of the particular camp they chose. But to everyone else, who's just they're not enthralled by a particular streamers. They can kind of hop from one to the next and listen to both sides of the arguments. Well, there are multiple sides to every debate actually, but um, basically to these people, there's no real degree of certain. Well, there's no real absolute certainty for anything. So all that piety, all that grandstanding, and I won, I crushed you, I destroyed you, I'm changing the world because of my speech and all that stuff. It comes across for someone like me or for the profile type as very arrogant, very pious, it's weird, it's odd, it's something that I feel like only exists in that realm of the online space and the media space. Like it in the real world, when you meet people, no one acts with such degree of arrogance and certainty. It's certainly a pitfall that I think most streamers and public figures should be aware of. Is that when people, that's okay. You alluded to the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump, that's actually one of the reasons I think why people are actually attracted to the guy is because he is arrogant. He is over the top, always speaking in hyperbolics and all that stuff. But it's the kind of arrogance and hyperbolic that when people in the real world have conversations and they're being very comical and humoristic and lighthearted about the conversations, they might play with that archetypal mode of being to be arrogant and to act as if you're 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 pumping your chest and you're grandstanding and all that stuff. We play at that all the time, but it's never really serious. So when people see Donald Trump and people like that, and Donald Trump can actually crack a joke in between and be ridiculous and be vulgar and all that stuff, he kind of cuts through that grandstanding and that display of piety. And I think that's actually what people seek nowadays. And it's not only Donald Trump and in the political sphere; it's in the media in general. There's a yeah, there's a big disconnect between people who make a living out of being authoritative and plebs who basically have no authority on anything. And when we discuss things, it's with the utmost humility. And everything we say is to be taken with a grain of salt. You can have your own hypothesis about things. Um, uh, yeah. And I actually think, Destiny is big. Andrew Wilson is getting bigger. There's a lot of streamers who have big clout. They have big audiences. But relatively speaking, they're fucking small audiences.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, like there would be like the news networks are like probably like the monsters amongst like these like small political streamers, which, right?
But even then, even the big media corporations, like the traditional media, quote unquote, um, I would like to see stats about the not well, that would be hard to poll for, but I would like to know what proportion of the population listens to all that stuff, traditional media, new media, whatever, and in that amount of people, what proportion of that sample population actually take that stuff with a high degree of seriousness, or is it merely entertainment and all that? So it kind of goes back to,
Is it entertainment or
is the public,
yeah?
yeah, is it entertainment or are people actually swayed by what they listen to?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about it. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, I think there's a lot of arguments that could be made for it just being entertainment, right? Like, again, like we were talking, the Trump debate yesterday, that seemed more for entertainment than actually getting to the root of anything for me. Like, it was just like, okay, this doesn't seem like something that is trying to achieve anything that I would call positive, right?
And
So
you mentioned like there are probably people who say like, oh, Biden still won that debate based on the facts, and other people will say that Trump won based on the facts and maybe because they like the temperament and the persona as well. But from what I've gathered, most people were kind of, I don't know. I think most people didn't like the debate. They came with kind of a bitter taste in their mouth, and I think it's because they were not entertained. I'm not so sure people watch it for the philosophical value it holds. I think it holds zero fucking philosophical value. Actually, it was so banal, so empty. There was no depth in like the thought process we can kind of perceive both candidates of having. it was like very surface level stuff. It's my opinion, your opinion. I think the facts are X. He thinks the facts are Y, and it's no, I'm right. No, he's right. No, I'm right. Da, 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 da. It's like, nah, it wasn't entertaining. And from what I've gathered, most people, yeah, you have people who are happy from their bias standpoint, but I think most people were kind of, yeah, just kind
Disappointed
of
by it,
boring to most
right?
people. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, disappointed. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I said, like just watching that back, it was just yeah, as you said, it's just two people trying to state that they're telling the truth. One being very doomer about the way he's talking about things, and one just kind of being cohesive about like the way he's talking. So it was just it's very strange, like the way we are approaching
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these topics now.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, I guess that's the value of online commentary and the fact that since it's not only the traditional media at play, but there's a bunch of different channels and there's actually a plethora of social commentators, that's actually a good thing because people can see, like, people who take 4 hours, 6 hours, even some streamers go to like the extent of 8 to 10 hours talking about stuff, debating with people, and really diving into topics and subjects. So I think the internet provides people with a different perspective on what is actually profound and what actually has depth behind the claims. Like, so when we see these two fucking idiots up there just making claims after claims, then maybe there's the format of the debate. I know CNN was way more robust in their format, way more constraints was put on the candidates. But even a few days ago, like even back then, 20 years ago, it's always like a question of showmanship. You have an hour and a half, maybe two. And well, you have 2 hours, but it's not on one particular topic. You actually address 20 fucking topics or
Yeah.
so. Um, so I think the online sphere of social commentary has that going on for itself. They give us a different perspective on what is actually profound. Yeah.
Would you say that traditional media has kind of alienated themselves from a lot of these like crowds for the way that they approach some of these like subjects?
Mm, I'm not sure it's have they alienated themselves. I think they've always alienated. I don't think it's a new phenomenon. As I've said back in, like, when I look at the statistics when it comes to the participation rate in politics in the 80s, here in Quebec at least, the participation rate was 30 to 40%. So people were not enthralled by all of this. Even though you had television, you had radio and different news media outlets at the time. Um, I think even without the internet, again, yeah, are people that susceptible to suggestion and what goes on in the public sphere? Because even if you go deeper, like you have traditional media, you have which is a very constrained set of people actually propagating their ideas and discussing these things. Then you have the new realm of media on the internet. It's a larger portion of people and it's a bigger sample size of opinionated people. But if you can go a layer deeper and think people on their fucking couch with their friends or at a bar or having a beer outside on their fucking patio, they have I'm pretty sure people have deeper conversations than conversation we can hear on TV or on the internet. So I would say people are more compelled because the message, like the kind of the medium that is made to entice you to participate is now more present because of the internet. Uh, I think that's the only reason why people participate nowadays. It's because it's more in our face. We're reminded of it more often. It's like you're reminded of the existence of McDonald's quite often, right? So maybe you're against it, but you still get some McDonald's. Um, it's the same. It's the same fucking thing. It's always in your face, so you think about it more often. But in a way, it's there's I feel like there's probably the same disconnect between the conversations people have in their intimacy and what they watch on TV and on the internet. So yeah, there's a larger pool. It's a good thing because it's better than so the media is getting better because of communication technology, but it's not at the same level as the conversations people are actually having boots on the ground, grassroots, when you meet people in real life and all that stuff. I know a lot of people nowadays live online. I'm kind of guilty of that quote unquote pleasure myself.
Yeah, I can
But
agree.
I think there's more valuable conversations to be had when you're not in a well, it depends on the lifestyle you have as well. So maybe people from the city have less of these conversations. But when you're in a rural area, you're just mowing your lawn, you're outside, you have your neighbor out there mowing his lawn, you engage in a conversation, maybe you invite them for a beer, you spend 3, 4, 5 hours talking about shit, and maybe you have deeper conversations than most of the formats allow to when it comes to media. So like there's the constraints of the technology and a real conversation, which is let's say it's a biological technology. It's a technology, quote unquote. It's an amalgam of it's an emerging phenomenon from the amalgams that constitutes us and all that stuff. So it's akin to technology in a way, but it has less constraints than technology. Anything that is made to propagate and to be outwardly and to transmit is always constrained by the technology itself. But a conversation, the constraints of a conversations are very mild compared. Like actually, you have the constraints of a natural conversations. Add to that the constraints of an internet platform, and then you can add to that the constraints of a traditional media platform. So you just every whenever you participate in public forums, public media forums, you just participate in a system. Well, let's call it a system. It's a system with layers of constraints, like layers and layers of constraints that make the conversation dull and very surface level. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah. So
so so
again, I
so you would say it's more of like the a networking issue that would be the issue there, or
it's an issue with technology and the format it provides. And
gotcha.
I think I'm well, maybe it's just me, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people. I'm still dissatisfied with the level of conversations I can see in media in general, be it on the internet or be it in traditional media, and worse so in a presidential candidate debate.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like the presidential candidate debate has been on a serious downfall, but I would say that I do see a pretty big rise of like interesting conversations on the internet, particularly. That I don't really. I think that since we all fall into like a little bit of the pitfall of like sensationalism for sure, right? Like we want to talk about the thing that's happening. So I think that's kind of where like whatever people want to call like these large networks fall into. I think that's kind of like their like thing. They have to like sell sensationalism, otherwise they're like not going to get the views they desire, and they're a billion-dollar company, so they kind of have to work that way. Otherwise, it's against
Yeah,
their best
you
interests. So
have streamers who actually manage not to fall for that pitfall. I'm thinking Rob Noor. He's a conservative, but he dives into all the legislative issues surrounding Donald Trump and all that stuff. But the fact that he lingers on it and that it's all he ever talks about, he has a very small audience. But still, he does it.
Yeah, I would
There's
say
Robert.
Rob Noor is one of the few people that I've seen like dive into legislative like text to a severe degree, where you don't
Yeah,
really see
you have
that.
Tony Guvia, I think. As well.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's very hard to find people that are like go into that level of detail, which I
Hmm.
appreciate, even if they like are on the opposite side of the aisle for me. Like I appreciate that someone's willing to do that, right? Like that means like you know the subject very well. You're gonna be able to argue it very well, um, and at that point, it actually feels like I'm having a conversation on like principles instead of just ideals.
Hmm.
I think that's a large issue that I see with like big debate streamers, right? Like I think that a lot of them argue from an idealistic standpoint instead of like a principled standpoint, where it's just where I like Andrew Wilson's a very good example of this, where he has very principled takes where I'm just like, okay, I can actually like understand Andrew from this aspect, or like at Destiny again, he gives out his like, but they both fall into the idealism for like certain arguments, right? Where it's like there are weaker arguments, like let's say like religion. Andrew's gonna go more ideologue than he would with like any other like debate that he would be having, right? Which
Hmm.
religion is kind of like the nature of the beast, right? Like you kind of have to go into ideology there instead of a more
Values,
principled
yeah.
stance. Yeah.
Uh, Wait, how do you define? What's your distinction between ideas and principles? But because I kind of feel like
Principles
all
are
principles are ideas.
I yes, I would say that like yes, principles can be ideals, but the distinguishing factor between an ideal and a principle would be that there's something concrete about a principle, right? Like there's something that you're trying to achieve with these concrete like things, right? Like let's say
Uh,
legislation or like something like that. Ideals
so
can
so
lead to
basically, it's
principle, but
so principles are prescriptive. Is basically what you're saying.
yes.
Okay, and ideals are more so. Okay,
Um, Ideals are
they're
more
value
yeah,
statement.
they're value statements, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Do you actually think that there will ever be a winning party? That there'll be unity at some point under a specific or particular ideology?
Here's the interesting thing to me. Like, this is why I like history so much. We used to here, like, we used to have like pretty much a bipartisan like government where yes, we had political parties, but we came to agreements a lot more often than we came to like disagreements, right? Like, I don't think we'll ever achieve 100% unity, but I think that was a good approach to how we view things. I think bipartisanism is very important in government, and I think that's kind of like what we're lacking at the moment.
Well, but do you actually? Well, I
But
mean, there was a mutual
I
respect for
yeah,
sure,
yeah,
but
but
there still was a dichotomy, right?
yeah, there was a dichotomy. Like that's what I'm saying. I don't think that we'll ever reach a level where we're all 100% in agreement of everything, right? Like I just don't think that's possible. I think humans seek conflict in certain ways, whether that just be from our ideals or our principles or whatever standpoint we want to take. But I think that's kind of something that I don't think I would ever see humanity capable of reaching 100% understanding with each other.
Mm, yeah.
Because there's always going to
Yeah,
be
because that.
a need for stuff, right? Like there's always going to be a need for resources, need for something that the other person's going to have. So I just don't think it's possible.
And different value judgments.
For sure.
Mm, yeah. because that's another thing that I feel is kind of odd when it comes to debates and political discussions, societal discussions, is that not only do you have people who are kind of forced to adopt an authoritative stance, but they also adopt a stance where they act as if there is an end goal there, that there will be victorious in the end. There will be a point in history where their particular camp will hold hegemony over other. But when you look at history again, um, it's like, okay, politically nowadays you have at the top you have two parties, but when you dig deeper, you have a bunch of different sub parties that just don't make the cut. But then maybe we could consider different philosophical uh, ideologies as being political camps in a way, because politics is just a manifestations of those.
Yeah.
But then you can get in you can fragment it even a layer down where you have, at some point I agree with Jordan Peterson. I think you have as many ideologies and philosophies as you have individuals and perspectives and interests.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
when you
And
look at history, that's actually what you see. You go back to the you go back to antiquity Greece and you see the same kind of ideologies that we see battling nowadays, and none of them actually won ever. It's a perpetual state of dialectic between all these parties. But and again, it's not merely philosophy or political affiliations. It's more so a question of a plethora of temperaments, I feel like. And there
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
for sure.
the only
I think a good example of this would be like a lot of people like to think that monarchies are like a because there's one set ruler, right? That everyone would fall in line, right? But that's not even necessarily true because when we look at monarchies, though, like especially like the European ones, they assign lords to specific lands, and lords' laws are very different from each other. Like you can have you can be like trespassing in one person, where in another place you'd be okay with it, right? Like the ideologies is always going to change no matter what, even if you only have one ruler on the top. I don't think there is a way to like dismantle like in individuals like ideology or principles or values to a degree where we would be all following one thing.
there is I mean, maybe it's my own interpretation of it, but there is one perspective I feel like could rise above, but I'm not even sure it can become a universal. But I like to think of that Egyptian third eye. I know there's a lot of esoteric stuff about it's your inner subconscious sense of the world, and like you can reach more profound truth through meditation. You can reach your third eye and perceive but I take it more symbolically and I lay on top of it my own interpretation. I think it's the way I use it in my own mind is that seeing that there's a plethora of temperaments, philosophical ideologies, and political parties that are kind of battling for quote unquote supremacy, and they don't see, you can see the dynamic and you can see them battling each other thinking they'll win at some point. But I feel like being the third eye, being the thing that rises above it, and maybe I think that's the only place where we could find unity is in that realization that that is the case. That is the ontology of the societal dichotomies on many different fronts and shit. And if you can actually perceive and be cognizant of that, that's where you can rise above and think outside of the box, quote unquote. And then maybe you can come up with novel ideas and be maybe that's where you can find solutions to be more conciliatory between the parties and the temperaments. When you like it's a very libertarian, I think, idea that well there's the famous John Lennon "Let It Be," Beatles "Let It Be." There's the "Let's agree to disagree." um I'm against what you're saying, but I will defend what you're saying, blah blah blah. Like there's a bunch of statements like that are statements that kind of show someone rising above the reality of the dichotomy and the disagreements and all that stuff. And if you can create a philosophy, and maybe that's what Nietzsche actually tried to develop when he wrote Zarathustra and he talked about the Ubermensch. But when you can perceive all that and you can create a philosophy that takes into account that reality, maybe that's where you can find a more universalizable, um, I don't know, set of ideals or rules and regulations to adopt in between parties and people and temperaments. But that takes. I mean, I'm 33 years old,
That would take a
and
level of
at age
co-op.
20,
I would think that would take a
I don't know.
lot of like cooperation from a lot of people, and I don't necessarily see us going that route, right? At least for
Philosophical education, maybe it just goes through education. Maybe communication technologies will actually allow us to have such a conversation among so many people because nowadays everyone has access to the public conversation. Maybe that's where it'll lead us. Maybe the next generation will live with that reality that everywhere they go, they're confronted with people who think different things, and so it becomes integral of in their lives and in their universe and their sense of the world, right?
yeah, but do you think they would lose that categorization ability that we have like currently that we do to a lot of people, like we like to fit people into certain boxes?
Categories, categorization, and being cognizant of dichotomies and like the dynamics between parts. Um, to me, is it's just a distinction tool. At that point, you can now that you've distinguished the parts, what do you do with them, or how do you react or interact with them is kind of the issue.
Yeah.
At that point, the ontology is established. What do you do? Like, what's the prescriptive part when you realize the nature of the world as such? You know,
Yeah.
just do you continue playing the game, or do you actually try to be a participant, but know and keep in mind that you're able to leave. You know, you can go in and out of the game if you want to. You know,
Yeah.
um, that's one of the things that actually interests me in all the hermits kind of archetypes is and even in the Buddhist monks and the yogis and all that stuff, their capacity to go into society, live with people, and when they go back outside, when they're, I think that's actually the purpose of meditation, is actually to disconnect from that game that is being played, that socialite game.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Cancel out some of the noise. Yeah, I get that. By the way, chat,
Mhm.
if you have any questions for Tom, uh type them in, and we're gonna be ending in about 20 minutes. So
Mhm.
if you got anything you want to ask him, just type it in chat and we'll read it out. But yeah, let's go into more into the hermit lifestyle. Like I think a lot of people would be interested in finding out about that. Like what
Well,
benefits do you
one
really see from like separating yourself for every now and again?
peace, quiet, and then well, in a way, there is a negative side to being alone and being very introverted, let's say, and introspective. It's so that those negative aspects of it kind of makes you more appreciative of the social interactions you can get when you go back into like, communal uh, circumstances. And but the fun fact is, they've studied through high frequency imagery brains of these monks, like the Buddhist monks and the yogis, who isolate themselves in the mountains for like years and stuff. And you know how there are bumps and crevices in the structure of the brain, in the outer layers of the brain? And you've actually probably heard of the expression being smooth brain, right? And
Yeah.
it's related to being a little bit dumber, being more simpleton.
Yeah.
And they found out that these monks actually have an increase in these bumps and like the textures of the upper layers of their brains. So that's an interesting little fun fact.
Yeah.
But
I would
I
think that would be like the logical conclusion though there, because like you are a lot more in your head, right? Like you are having a lot
mhm,
more thoughts than like let's say the average person that's just kind of going day by day.
mhm. You're more into your internal cogitations than into interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing actually is once you learn to actually not always be in that mode where everything is has to be externalized, everything is has an outward, like your will is very focused on everything that is outwardly, and you can really introspect and focus on the sensations you have throughout your body and all that stuff. You can take that mind state, and actually even when you're with people, you can keep it with you at all times. So it helps you be less susceptible to suggestions, because you can actually you're more in, you can yes, you can be open to outside sources of information and stimuli, but at the same time being able to kind of go back and forth in between. I'm being receptive and I'm being analytical. Like I can be, you can be both, but it's I mean, people who socialize a lot can do both, and I'm saying you can't, but it's
I would say there's a
meditating and
lot more.
isolating
Yeah, I think there would be a lot more with the
is an
meditating and isolating.
exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, it's a form of training for that particular capacity, and and I mean, apart from that, just for your emotional regulations, just the state of quietude and peacefulness it brings about.
Uh,
Um, Not having any imperative in the moment, you know.
yeah.
Um,
What would you say some of the
there's
negative
that's
aspects of that would be though?
well, everything you can think of that is positive from social interactions. If you have negative emotions and or if you have trauma, being in social environments can kind of distracts you. There is a point where distractions are kind of bad because you actually need at some point to focus on your issues. But maybe you can find solutions through other people as well. So outside output is very beneficial. So that would be like all the positive aspects of socializations are the negative aspects of isolation and vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, when did he
Would you
kiss his
say
first
there?
man? Fuck you. um,
That is the answer, people. We
but
found
uh,
it.
but yeah, I was thinking about that today, and one of the things I would like to see more in people. I talked about like having convictions and having passions, and display these passions and convictions and achievements more so than trying to gather appreciation and social points and all that stuff. Um, I was thinking today, is it actually, can one actually be curious of the world they live in? Can they love things without these things and subjects of curiosity being practical, or uh, can you love something without claiming ownership of it or thinking that it belongs with you in any way? Can you be curious of things without that love that is without a sense of propriety and belonging and ownership? and I feel like that's something that people who don't display passions, who maybe people who actually don't. I'm pretty sure everyone has passions, but maybe people just don't are not able to find their own. But I'm assuming they probably don't have that curiosity for the world, like that genuine. You're walking in the woods there. You have no imperatives. You have no goals. You're just an empty vessel moving through the woods. When you come across something, you can crouch, look at it, study it, observe it, and very be you can focus on it 100% and be really curious about it in a way that it's not empathy per se, but you kind of gain a certain respect for smaller things and more modest, humble, and maybe mundane things. I think that's another. I don't know why. I wouldn't say I know why, but that's one thing I learned from being someone who really enjoys uh, being isolated a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Would you say there is a healthy mixture to both though? Like I would think that there like
yeah,
isolation is important to me. Like I do like try to separate myself from the world, but I do try to have like a certain level of social interaction because again, I have to have that because I feel like that's the best course for me to like you said there's sometimes bringing in someone from like when I'm dealing with an issue can bring an idea to my head that I didn't think about, right? Like, I think these are like the beneficial things to socially interacting with people or like the world around me. So I don't know
yeah.
how you would feel about like what is a good mixture of the two things that you would like to do. Like, would you
I'm
say
more so the
isolation like overpowers it, or would you be more on like the social interaction is very important, so I try to focus more on that, or
I
what
don't
is
know
your take
where
there?
the sweet spot is, but I would say I have a deep feeling that nowadays we're especially people in big cities. I think that nowadays we're way, 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 way too much into the always in social circumstance, always in the pressure of social obligations, your job, you you're like that's something I invoked a lot in your Discord is the relationship between being self-sufficient and we can call it consumerism, but I would say being independent versus being dependent. And I think nowadays people, not only for material things and for your basic needs, I think that people are way, way too dependent, even emotionally speaking, in terms of like, when you get in a room with people, especially in Discord and online, and you feel like other people are just waiting to be entertained. They're not really there to have a human conversation and a rapport with you. They're basically there to be entertained.
Yeah, or
I
people
feel
just
like
kind of walk
there's
in. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like there's way too much of that. There's so much social interactions that to a certain degree it becomes a commodity. And I feel like that's pretty bad.
But I would attribute that to some of the isolation part where it's just like it's very hard to. I feel like for a lot of these people, like for me, like I can jump into Discord and I'll talk to whoever, but I think for a lot of people, it's gonna be very difficult to like run in and just like kind of like just have the conversation. I think that's more of the crux of the issue there, where it's some sort of social anxiety.
Yeah, but I would argue that anxiety comes from too much socialization. And
Oh,
look, I have a certain bias, but even though my parents kind of not traumatized me, but in a way they kind of did. But I when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I heard them talk about the fact that I wasn't socializing enough at school and all that stuff, and that they would have to find ways to force me into socializing. But I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this because they were kind of victim of the like. There's a lot of conversation in school anymore about like a bunch of psychological stuff. Like your kid has to have a certain degree of self-esteem. They have to think this and that about themselves, and they have to interact to that degree and that specific amount during the course of the day to be considered to have a normal social lifestyle and all that stuff. And I feel like the simple fact that we kind of keep drilling and focusing on that idea in school when it comes to kids, I feel like for a kid who doesn't know what the world is, it just becomes like it's something you shouldn't even have to think about. It should come naturally. It comes naturally or it doesn't. Talking about it, putting pressure on it is just a form. It will just entail anxiety and ambiguity. Like anything that creates an abstracted source of ambiguity is the worst fucking source of anxiety.
Yeah. What would you say to people that say that that's kind of like by design to create like cogs in the machine, right? I think a lot of people have that thought process nowadays where it's just like they just are trying to create people to follow
No,
orders
I
or follow certain social standards.
it might have been true at the beginning of the industrial era, but I think now it's the tipping on the other side actually that is going on. And school is not we're so advert and we have such a profound disdain as a population for that particular philosophy of creating workers and all that stuff in the school system that we're trying to influence and kind of mold this. We're trying to change the mold that is the school in order to address um, our source of angst when it comes to how we perceive the school model to be set up. So nowadays, I feel like it's the total opposite that is going on. I feel like I do think there's too much talk about socialization. There's too much talk about psychological welfare in school. It's like at a certain point, and that's applicable to a lot of issues. I feel like I don't understand why people always rely on outside sources to solve these issues for them. They're very individual issues. So if the issue is individual, the next layer to help constrain or regulate the individual issues should be the familial structure. And then if that familial structure has issues as well that makes it so it cannot help the individual issues, then you have an upper layer of community, and then you have a larger society maybe. But again, like the closer, the more local the source, the more local the problem, the more local the solution should be. I think so.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say like there definitely is like you said, there's going to be different, like there's layers how we're going to approach these individual like subjects.
Like
I would say that
if I
yes,
were
I think we are lacking on the individual level. I think we do treat a lot of people like they're just again, like I was saying earlier, I think a lot of people do approach it with the cog in the machine analogy,
Yep.
but I don't know if that mindset, I don't necessarily know if that mindset's going to be going away anytime soon. I think if anything, it's increasing. I feel like especially with like how media presents itself. Like I think we do try to fall into like social trends and stuff like that. Where now I'm starting to see like some of the stuff that I've heard talked about, or it's just like
Yeah,
I
but
don't.
see that's the thing. Not only are we cogs in the machine, but we're psychologizing the cog in the machine,
Yeah.
which you cannot do. You cannot have both. Like we're either cogs in a machine or we are to be individualized and psychologized. But if I were to have kids at some point, I would hope that I would be the first layer of intervention.
Yeah.
Like I would hope that as a parent, I would have the opportunity. That I would be the first to have the opportunity to address the issues my kid is having. Like I wouldn't like a stranger, even though it's a system of like specialists and very experienced people. I would rather be the first layer of intervention.
Yeah, but would you say that the change that we're seeing is because of people's laziness or the ability of not knowing how to approach certain
It's the
subjects?
it's the path of least resistance.
You would say it's
It's
because
all it is.
okay, because
It's outsourcing your.
I would say that there is a layer of not understanding where a lot of these things come from. Like I think that's where a lot of parents struggle, where it's like trying to essentially empathize or sympathize with the thing that your child's going through or whatever issue that might be at hand, right? And I don't I don't know if that I think personally, like if this isn't like anything based in like fact or anything, but I think personally it's just because the way they were brought up is very different from the way they're bringing us up, and then vice, and it's just going to continue down that chain. Do you understand what I mean there?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? I'm not so sure what you're saying.
Oh, okay. So like your parents were raised in a certain like degree, right? Like where they weren't taught like specific, like for me, like my parents weren't taught like emotional, how to release emotional fucking like responses healthy, right? For I had to learn that on my own, and that's gonna be something that I'm gonna try to instill into my kid. But I'm obviously not gonna understand every problem they're gonna be coming with because I don't have the tools equipped because I had to basically craft these things on my own, right? So I think that's a large issue that I think that's a larger issue that we've been seeing. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think that's where a lot of it derives from, at least for me, in my perspective.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there's it's talking about psychological issues is a double-edged sword because in a way it can help to troubleshoot your issues, but on the flip side, maybe there are some issues that are better not talked about, and that going through the course of the different stages, emotionally speaking, of let's say grief, for instance, or trauma, is better than layering a bunch of conceptual notions and ideals of what is normal, what is I like, what is better, what is worse in terms of how to deal with these issues and what state you
For
should
sure,
be in
for sure.
at the end of it. And there's also the pitfall of emotional states and your own consciousness is something that is perpetually in movement. It's something that is ever changing, ever moving, ever reacting to things. It's perpetually stimulated by a bunch of stuff. And when you start thinking about things conceptually, uh, reaching a conclusion is pretty much akin to taking a photograph. Is you conclude something, you stop at a certain point, but the reality of your mind and your brain and your consciousness is that it's not the end. Like you will be confronted with circumstances in the future that will probably maybe refute certain things you thought of when it with regards to your particular trauma or issues or grief. But and maybe you'll come across circumstances that'll just fucking reanimate that trauma or that issue. Um, and I think it's in a way the term trauma is a term that is used in psychology to describe the exaggeration and exacerbation of an adaptive function of the brain. So to start doubting these functions and to start pathologizing every emotional reaction you may have. Um, I think it's there's a pitfall there.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to stop it for today. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming on, Tom. That was an interesting conversation. A lot was discussed there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to talk to Blur, he is in our Discord, and I don't know if you want to plug your Discord, but you can do that as
Nah, it's
well.
fine. It's more of a
Okay.
friends and shit.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want to ever have a conversation with Tom, he does spend some time in our Discord, so that that's a good place to meet up, and we're usually talking about some sort of BS in there, so drop by.
Mm-hmm.
But with that,
Questions in chat.
do you want to say a farewell to the chat?
Farewell, chat. It's all people we know, I guess. Huh?
Yeah.
No questions at all.
So
All right, good.
I'm gonna be leaving the Discord for the moments while I close up the stream. But thanks again
Mm-hmm.
for coming.
All
Always
right. Thanks for
appreciated.
having me.
No problem.
All right. Good night, man.
Peace. Okay, guys. Well, that was very interesting. I enjoyed that conversation. I probably am gonna watch this one back for sure. Um, don't forget, I have Smite Sundays with Detox and Dave, so make sure to drop by for that. Other than that, I don't think I have any other announcements. So I think I'm just gonna end it here and just end it on that high note. All right, guys. Peace.